right, next up, we have Stephanie Caldera, who has been with DEQ since October of 2008. So again, lots of experience and background in sociology, communications, municipal sustainability projects, and anti-violence social service work. To her environmental justice coordinator and board support roles at DEQ. That's a lot. Outside of the office, Stephanie spends time slowly overhauling her small backyard space in Northeast Portland, rearranging the living room furniture depending on the season, and constantly improving her cooking game. So take it away, Stephanie.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me today. What I'll do now is sort of take the share screen here for the next set of slides that I have for you today. And thank you again for having me in this afternoon. I appreciate being able to talk to this group, and definitely some of my colleagues are here in this space, and I appreciate being able to talk to them today, as well as the rest of the group. So with that, I'll sort of launch in. The intro, as was noted, I serve as Oregon DEQ's Environmental Justice Coordinator. I will be here presenting a little bit on House Bill 4077, sort of what that means and some connections, and also perspectives on what that could mean related to work specific for modeling. And then just to note, as the agency's environmental justice coordinator, I'm in our director's office and also serve to support our environmental quality commission. So that dual role, but links together pretty well in terms of being able to take a policy approach to environmental justice and board support. So very briefly, and I apologize for the many, many words on the screen, I will read them. I did just want to do a quick background of what is environmental justice. Some of the other speakers today, we're talking about this and its elements. And so as seen on the screen here, this is from House Bill 4077, which I'll go into in detail on the next slide. And it means equal protection from environmental and health risks, fair treatment and meaningful involvement in the decision-making of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, immigration status, income, or other identities, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies that affect the environment in which people live, work, learn, and practice spirituality and culture. Like I said, there are a lot of words on this page, but those words are very critical to sort of setting up the framework of ensuring that at its most basic level, our regulatory decisions related to environmental regulations are not discriminatory. And it's good governance, it's the law. As an EPA delegated agency, Oregon DEQ, subject to federal environmental justice policies, as well as the provisions of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And also we're subject specifically to House Bill 4077, which is an update to some of Oregon's environmental justice laws. So I'm going to speak a little bit specifically here about that House Bill 4077 and what that was passed in 2022, and it was also known as EJ for All. So some of you may be familiar with the bill, and these are some highlights of what it did. The EJ Council, which was just talked about a little bit, that is an update of what was formerly known as the Environmental Justice Task Force. That task force has been around since 2008. It was created as part of Senate Bill 420, brought forward by Abel Gordley at that time, and that established Oregon's environmental justice laws and structure. The council is updating to bring out one additional member who is actually a youth representative. So a person under, I believe it's the age of 24, who would serve on the council in recognition that going from 12 to 13 people, but adding a youth member because if we're working in climate, if we're working in environmental justice, recognizing that the folks who will sort of be the next ones moving into the spaces should have, again, that meaningful, critical, involved voice in determining the decisions that affect them. A key part here that I'm going to talk about more today is the second bullet directs the Environmental Justice Council to develop an Oregon-specific mapping tool. This is a little bit different than the mapping tool you did hear about in the last session, but since we're just getting started, we get to sort of have the benefit of working with our other partner agencies, all the state agencies working together and understanding what data is currently out there, what data we do not have. The Oregon-specific element of that, currently there is a federal tool called EJ Screen, folks might be familiar with. That was developed by EPA, and they actually just rolled out version 2.1. And I do encourage folks to check that out if they're interested. And that uses effectively web-based GIS, but nationally consistent and nationally standardized data. Here in Oregon, we may have some, specific land use or fish and wildlife resources that other parts of the country are not as concerned with or may not have. And so for us, it became imperative to then look at what are the Oregon-specific environmental inputs, public health outcomes, and other sort of Oregon-specific data that could be used to go into this mapping tool. The charge for that mapping tool is that the EJ Council is the lead entity, but working in co-partnership, DEQ and the Oregon Health Authority, each were allocated basically a new position to help co-lead that. And as well, it's in coalition with the state's GIS office, the Institute for Natural Resources, and several other entities and higher education consortiums to help co-create this mapping tool. As part of that, the council will be leading statewide engagement efforts. Effectively, the bill asks that there is a report back to the legislature, I believe by January 1, 2025, to sort of report out on where the mapping tool is in development and or use. And part of that is statewide engagement with at least 6 community engagement opportunities, working with advocacy and environmental data groups to sort of get to communities, get that feedback on, again, what do these communities need versus us as a state agency or a state body going out and telling them or making assumptions about what the environmental justice concerns or needs are in any community. And lastly, I spoke a little bit to it, but those positions. So there are actually 3 positions specifically allocated in this bill, again, passed in 2022. Those 2 technical positions, the research analysts who will help co-lead the mapping tool, and then 1 brand new position, which is actually a full-time staff member for the Environmental Justice Council. Previously, and it will remain, it's part of the governor's office sort of body. It's appointed by the governor and its membership there and supported through the governor's office. However, they've never had a full-time staff person. The staff from the Natural Resource Policy Office have sort of been assigned to these topics, have often carved out time within their very busy schedules. So by having the dedicated staff support, that additional resource, looking towards really the ability for this body to take on more research. The entities, the folks who are sitting around those tables, they're volunteers, like all of our boards and commissions. And so the staff support to do the policy research and to ensure that there is coordination across agencies and with partner states as well is a pretty critical part of this update for House Bill 4077. I just wanted to talk a little bit specifically and bring it in a little bit to the air world here on, when we're looking at why is it important to have the Oregon specific mapping tool. Some of you may have seen these maps and data before, and thank you to my colleagues in our air quality division here at DEQ for this information. So as I mentioned, House Bill 4077 charges the council with support from DEQ and OHA to develop this new Oregon specific mapping tool. And so our air quality division, which is where these are from at DEQ, has started some of that preliminary work, sort of working within our own purview, but also recognizing some of this data may be information that the council wants to include in some of its layers. Panel 1, sort of on the left of your screen, so that shows the mapping of air pollution burden. So that's basically exposures and looking at that. And I apologize, they're very, very, very small pieces of information on your screen there, but it just sort of covers, there's looking at air toxins, PM 2.5, so both, sort of standard pollutants, emerging pollutants, and looking at the ways that those are distributed across the state. So again, thinking about the ways that we include the data layers here to visually show the information on the data we have. And the maps are really helpful for DEQ when we're assessing air pollution overall. But the understanding is that we really need to dig into the data and also connect with the communities to understand sort of how the burdens are felt and also effectively validate that the folks in these communities have had the opportunity to engage and understand sort of what exposures may be and how we as a state regulatory agency might be able to respond. So just bringing in more data. And then on the right, the second panel, this fair treatment chart shows actually a distribution of some socio-demographic factors based on sort of risk. So what you can see is it's, again, air toxics and PM 2.5, and it correlates race and cancer risk, poverty level and cancer risk, and age and cancer risk for air toxics. And then on the right, looking at race and exposure to PM 2.5, the same, poverty level and age. And so what we can see is that when we look at sort of the socio-demographic distribution, there is an uneven distribution of the environmental burden. And again, this is some sort of new assessments and new analysis that's coming in from specifically from our air quality team. And this is just one way that's sort of overlaying what data we do have versus perhaps some new opportunities to look also a little bit more holistically at socioeconomic data. You know, Cody was talking a little bit about the connection between housing and land use and the ways that people sort of engage in their communities. And so for this Oregon specific mapping tool, bringing these agencies together to sort of look a little bit more cross-programmatically, but cross-agency on sort of what are the burdens that we know and where are the data gaps where we feel that there's credible reason to believe that maybe there is disproportionate environmental harm based on, you know, whether it's race or age or income level, that is disproportionate based on that effective protected class status. So this is just showing a little bit of the data and information, and really, you know, I'll spend a couple minutes here and just sort of thinking about, you know, from my perspective as the agency's environmental justice coordinator, I work in the policy realm. I don't work in data, and it's always very exciting to be in these spaces with the folks who are doing more of the data work of, you know, what are the ways that we can sort of see how House Bill 4077 and environmental justice, incorporating the principles of environmental justice into our work, including our modeling, would be an important element. And just 3 points here of time of looking at how do we sequence modeling, monitoring, sort of what I imagine is an ongoing conversation of we can model the information, but based on that, you know, what information do we have? Do we have sort of baseline information for our communities, or do we need to develop those pieces of information? And where in time do we set those baselines? I know there are some folks on the call who, you know, have previously worked with and around the regional HAZE program, you know, and that was set a baseline and then targets that work towards it. How do we have those credible pieces of information so that we can start building into modeling or into our other programs, specific and, again, credible data? And that leads to the second point of data scrutiny, of thinking, you know, do we have the accurate demographic information? Do we have the accurate socioeconomic information? EJ Screen is a wonderful tool in being nationally consistent. It's very helpful, and it relies on census data. And as I think folks know, the census only counts what it counts. People who are houseless, people who are incarcerated, and in many times people who perhaps either choose or are unable to complete the census, they're not counted. And so we are missing, and particularly most likely more vulnerable populations within those counts. And so how do we understand and how do we validate that our data that's going into our models, or that are, you know, what are these inputs, and how do we ensure that they are giving us basically valid and accurate outputs as we're evaluating our programs? And then, you know, lastly, sort of a tenet of environmental justice is the people who are most affected by the decisions have the meaningful opportunity to participate in the decision making, to understand, and also have a credible chance to make and affect change for those. So thinking, you know, again, government collaboration, we heard about our prior partner agencies who are working together and sort of in new ways. This Environmental Justice Council is specifically leading the mapping development, so it's not a state agency. So they can sort of serve as the convening container or the umbrella under which state agencies, higher education, you know, innovative, whether it's innovative public-private partnerships, could potentially be brought into this and understand sort of whose voice is represented and whose voice is perhaps overrepresented in some of those conversations. And most importantly, how are we engaging with the community to ensure that we're getting their feedback, their engagement, and that it's not an exercise in government sort of making assumptions about what a community needs, and rather finding out directly from the community what the concerns are, and then using our data, our information to help steady or improve those concerns. Briefly, I just wanted to say a couple very specific ways that at DEQ we sort of integrate these ideas and center equity and environmental justice into our work. Here at the top is sort of, I spoke to the fact that DEQ is a federally delegated regulatory agency, so we're subject to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. That's effectively all those non-discrimination clauses that we all have in our regulations. Any entity that receives even $1 of federal funds is subject to those. So ensuring that our programs can provide meaningful access and equitable access to people regardless of what language they may speak or other elements of those protected class statuses. As well, DEQ has what's known as a performance partnership agreement with EPA. And this is basically an agreement we do every 2 years with EPA that outlines both our work plans, our obligations, and our commitments. And so those are done under federal law as well. We talked a little bit, I talked a little bit about House Bill 4077. Many of the directives in that bill are an extension of prior environmental justice laws, either an extension or a continuation. So ensuring that as an agency we are understanding, reviewing, and addressing, discrepancies and disproportionate environmental burden. And again, looking at what the EJ Council may be able to bring forward as their policy recommendation body to the governor. And so that gives them a lot of opportunity to sort of be in this space and sort of say, here's where we would like Oregon as a state to go. Additionally, just a couple other places where we do sort of bring these in, DEQ as an agency is looking at strategic planning processes and how do we ensure that as we're going through those processes, we are building EJ in from the start. A lot of our policy work, making sure that it's not just sort of a checklist or limited only to perhaps community engagement or public meetings, but saying fundamentally how do our programs support a more equitable Oregon and one that is aligned with both the equity framework and environmental justice principles. Lastly, a great work group that came about a few years ago, sort of out of interest, energy, and passion of some staff, and has grown and has now sort of become an ongoing functional work group, is an environmental justice work group that is looking at policy, engagement, and technical analysis. So some folks who are on this call, I think, are engaged with that group at DEQ. But others will be as we sort of lean into helping co-create the mapping tool and also looking at how we as a state agency doing a policy evaluation of how do our policies and procedures comply, or where are there gaps in terms of our ability to address environmental justice concerns across the state. That was a lot of words to go through very quickly, and I appreciate everybody's time today. Wanted to save some time if there were questions. And then also my contact information, and yeah, very much look forward to any follow-up that folks may have on this House Bill 4077 or any other part that I've covered today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was awesome. Alex has got his hand up for a question right away. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I guess one question and one just kind of comment, maybe. It was probably in there, but can you maybe put in the chat, are those layers available, or are those still being worked on? Like, are those, and I missed if there was, like, are there official 4077 layers to use, I guess?
There are not yet. We are extremely at the beginning of the process. Likely all of you on this call may at some point be asked to provide input or feedback or perhaps data on what could go into that mapping tool. It's I mean, we're just about ready to release the job description to hire. So we're really at the beginning of that portion for the technical work.
Got it. Yeah, that was, I saw the pretty pictures and I thought that maybe it was, okay, so my fault there.
No worries. Then those were other tools that were developed by colleagues in the air quality division at DEQ. So those are in use internally, but they're not part of the 4077 potentially yet.
Got it. And then I think maybe 3 slides back, you had kind of the some of the challenges. So yeah, that one right there. And so I think those are all correct, and I think those are what we will likely be working on as a community over the next couple of years. I just wanted to highlight, I don't exactly know if this is correct for DEQ. I know DEQ does forecasting as well, but some agencies are a little bit more in the in the reality of now. And most of our modeling and planning work is out on the 20-year horizon. And so this is a meaningful way forward to know where people are now, and to kind of make the assumption that where they are now is roughly where they might be in the future. And so when we're making 20-year plans, who are we impacting? But kind of as it ties into all these threads, the tricky part is, or the part that's not here, and the part that we haven't, it's going to be very difficult, harder than this, is forecasting part of where people will be. And there's 2 elements to that. It's not actually technically difficult to forecast. Well, there's difficulties, but it's actually technically easier to forecast where people are going to be than the political component of making a forecast on where people are going to be. That's the hard thing, is saying what side of the tracks is going to be the poor side versus the rich side. So I just want to kind of call that out, that it's not really a technical challenge, although there are lots of technical challenges there. It's a political challenge more than a technical challenge. And this, I think most of this discussion is more about understanding where people are now, and it's different than forecasting where people are going to be. And then the other piece to that came up in our Oregon transportation planning work is wanting to understand how people of different races and backgrounds are impacted. And our modeling work assumes that race is not something that dictates behavior. I just want to call that out because some people might say, well, we should get race into our behavior models, but that's a pretty dangerous thing to do, to assume that a different race of people will always behave differently in a situation than a different race of people. Stereotypes, model stereotyping. And we actually do this with gender. Different genders might have different comfort levels around biking. And so we embed that males are more willing to bike than females. And I think that's probably right. I'm just calling out that, so 2 issues that are very tough: forecasting where people are going to be, and beyond just the head count, but the demographics of where people are going to be. And then, what do you do around reporting how different people behave? And do you embed stereotypes in your modeling assumptions based on current behavior? Or do you assume that those can change and shift in the future, and that it's not really a person of the color of someone's skin or their background? It's really more of the socio-demographic information that determines how people make decisions. So I've said a lot, but I'll stop.
And I appreciate it. And I think those points are very well taken. And that's part of it is also finding, how do we embed those expertise into our analysis? Who do we need to talk to about that? Whether I think maybe I skipped over, but the Portland State University Population Research Center is part of the group, and we will be sort of looking at what are the sort of well, I said my background in sociology. I'm excited to think about what are the sociological implications of immigration. What are the larger climate implications of movement of people across state lines and to different regions. So some of these are great things that I think are going to hopefully be supported through the development process. And then just honing in on that engagement of people, rather than, again, not building in stereotypes to the models, but actually saying, well, let's go to that group of people, whether it's based on gender or race or income level, and let's find out what are their, of course, would have to be sort of from a representative rather than every single person of that ilk. But how can we address those things in a meaningful way that actually reflects actual data? So great points, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Eric, you have a question?
Oh,
Stephanie?
not so much a question. I wanted to thank Stephanie for the comprehensive background of the EJ mapping tool work. I really appreciate that. And I also wanted to introduce myself. I'm the EJ mapping tool lead at the Oregon Health Authority, and I'm looking forward to the continued work with the DEQ staff. We've already done quite a bit, but we have so much more to do. And I did want to respond to one of Alex's questions about the data development. Yeah, there's a lot of data development underway. And like Stephanie mentioned, the Population Research Center is putting together a pretty big catalog of data right now as well. And then we'll be working on some stuff here at OHA with DEQ.
Yes, Eric, I was very excited to see you on this call, and I'm very excited that I do believe we are at DEQ. We are very close to issuing the recruitment announcement for your research analyst counterpart over here at DEQ. So you'll have your DEQ counterpart coming hopefully as soon as we possibly can.
I am super excited about that. I know I've been asking, like, in every meeting with DEQ when you guys are going to be fully staffed up. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
So I think from the perspective of the Oregon Modeling Statewide Collaborative, it's kind of in our name, there is clearly overlap between member agencies related to environmental justice and equity. And we're going to be working on our work plan next month. We'll come together and talk about our work plan for the next couple of years. And the timing's right. And I believe that we will come together in this area. Now's a good time. A lot of things are gelling. We all have different work going on for different reasons, but I think we can help each other a lot. And this is really exciting and overdue. I hope the election doesn't really impact us that much. I don't think it will too much. I mean, this is legislation. It's not just governor directed. So this is great. We got to get the momentum going.
Yeah. Well, and thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and thank you. And, you know, to sort of reflect on something